to welcome everyone here this evening for the second lecture in our series of visiting artists. The artist visiting today actually lives here. My colleague Eric Ouren, and he received his Master of Fine Art from the University of Iowa sometime in the 90s. And his Master of Art also from the University of Iowa, and his Bachelor of Fine Art from the University of Minnesota. He's been working here at Bethany since 2000, teaching a variety of courses, including foundation, ceramics, sculpture, and art history, among other things. And he presents himself as an artist, a kind of Renaissance man, because if you've been to some of his other shows, you notice that, well, his first show he did sculpture, figurative sculpture based on martyrs and saints. And then he did a show with collage that had more of a graphic feel to it. And then he did a show of ceramics, where you could take the show with you when you left the room. And so now he's doing photographs, which he calls Kasotagraphs. Kasotagraphs. No, I can't read the teleprompter here. Please welcome Eric Ouren. And I thought that was right in front of the he got into my first part of my lecture because I was going to say, you know, you all know me for doing other things, like, you know, I started out as a cartoonist. This is something I did 30 years ago. You know, I've done sculpture. Sorry if this goes fast, but first one from when I was in college. And I've did some, used to do some folk art, wood carvings. And, you know, there's more sculpture when I was much, much younger. And so was Bill. He's almost in the same place. So that is a sculpture that is no longer extant, except for parts of it. You may recognize that figure from the guy that haunts you all over there. And I've done some smaller object carvings, things like that were based on other objects. I've done chainsaw carvings. My daughter, she's the one in my lap. There's another combination chainsaw and wood, regular carving. I've done snow carving. There's a snow carving up at the Ely Winter Festival. There's another carving from the following, 2 years later. You know, this is 7 or 8 feet tall, doing things that snow is not supposed to do. Here's another chainsaw carving. This is a bust of Beethoven. And as Bill mentioned, the collage work that I did several years ago. Oops. Go back. Here it stayed. And then also, one of the things that I've done probably the longest and most consistently is built musical instruments. These are two of kind of, crazier instruments, and I've done less crazy instruments. And
now I've been building banjos, which are very traditional and not so crazy as the other ones were. Can everybody hear me in the back? Are we good? Okay, good. So why am I showing photographs? Because everybody takes photographs, and I certainly don't have seemingly the background to talk about photography, and especially when you can use your camera is a phone, and it's a computer. I mean, to me that's kind of crazy, having grown up with other kinds of things. It makes about as much sense as that to me. And we used to laugh at this when I was growing up, and now it's almost that kind of thing, that kind of reality. This was the first camera that I ever used. It didn't have a phone in it. Okay, I mean, you loaded film into it, and that was all that it did. You shot pictures with it, and so for me, this whole idea of being able to take your phone out and take a picture is something that's is very interesting, but also sort of throws me for a loop. I remember using a camera like this or some of the other later ones, and most of you have grown up probably digitally, right? How many of you grew up with any film? Okay. Maybe less than that. So, I remember we'd take our film in, and you'd wait for a week or something to get your film back. So you had to really think hard about what it was, or even try to remember what it was that you took a picture of before you could get your images back, and then hope that they weren't blurry and your thumb wasn't in front of the lens. Or my mother also used this camera, and she tended to kind of goof things up with that. Things would end up blurry, and so it was a little dangerous for some people to use cameras like that. So when I first started to use my phone as a camera, and then figured out that there was an Instagram program. Is it a program or an application? It's an application. So I started to kind of experiment with walking around with my phone and taking pictures with it. And so what I started to look at least where I was a lot of signage for one thing, because it was very graphic, and you could start to kind of break things up a little bit more and look to see that you were kind of experimenting with things that were, in my mind, more formal, which means that you're looking more at the basic design of the whole thing, including the color, the lines, the shapes, all the rest of that, and trying to see what would come from that. I like that one. That's the parent in me. And then, some other ones that told you to do other things, like sing. This one I wasn't ever sure what they were telling you to do. And as I started to think about using this camera and this format, because the camera that I first showed you was a square format camera, so it would take square photographs. It wasn't until you got into the 35 millimeter that you could actually shoot something that was rectangular. And so, having grown up with square format photography, but never really thinking about how it worked or how you actually can take a good picture with I thought that it would be kind of challenging to work on that and think about that. And then at the same time, I started to think about that I've been, kind of driving around the area. The longer you live somewhere, you tend to put blinders on and you take everything for granted that is out there to see. And you always wish that you were somewhere else that was more exotic than Kasotagraphs, Minnesota, or Mankato, Minnesota. And trying, the idea of re-seeing my local environment came up. And so I thought that would be a way that I could really start to look more closely at where I lived and at kind of the things that were out there in this world that I lived in. So again, looking at things in a more formal way than a kind of typical snapshot photograph. So these are all photographs that are not, or Instagram photographs that are not in the show, just so that you have a little variety. And there's a lot of stuff that's out there to see. And so the way that I figured out how to actually make this happen was that my dogs needed walking and I needed exercise. So I put the two of them together and found a route about 1.2 miles from my door in a loop and back to my door. And I would go out with my dogs. And if anybody has dogs, you know that dogs need to go out, at the same time, basically every day. So if you're getting up to take your dog out, it's going to be the same time in the summer as it is in the winter. And so when you are getting up at the same time every day, in the winter, it means that there's not a lot of light out there, and it's cold. And so trying to maintain a shooting regimen while you're out in the cold is also something that I hadn't really ever tried before or thought about doing. There's not a lot of winter shots in here, and there's a few on the wall. There's a winter. So it was a reason to kind of get out and get out with the dogs and make sure that I walked and make sure that I started to really look and see and think about what I was seeing and how they would make good images. A lot of that comes about also because I teach 2D and 3D design, and so the big thing that we talk about for both those classes are the elements and principles of design. And so trying to work that and think about those things into these images was also uppermost in what I was trying to do. One of the things that also I was able to do for a few of these was I got to know my neighbors' garbage cans really well. And they were blue and pink, so it was like there was a couple of boy and girl standing out there. But they were, it also, in looking at these, it got me thinking about this idea of, what an Instagram is, or coming out of the idea of the telegram. Telegram, is using words to tell people what you're thinking about or doing. And, an Instagram then is sending a picture and doing the same thing, except you're not really using words. I thought, if I was to send some of these as a telegram, you might say something like, "Dear Mom, I'm having an amazing visual experience with my neighbor's trash can." Stop. My visual apparatus is overloaded with these blues and pinks. And that black wheel is fabulous. So, but I don't have to say that because now I can just send a picture. They'll know what I mean by that. So these were the only models that I had when I was out and about, except for my dogs. So this is an example of one of the first of many cameras that I used as a kid. This was one that my dad had that he had been given in college. So this is an Argus camera. It's a box camera that's incredibly uncomfortable to hold. And the peephole to use this rangefinder camera is so small. You have to peer into this thing. But it took relatively good pictures. I found some old ones that my dad had taken, and one of the things that I guess I am thankful for is that my dad actually had a pretty good eye when you talk about somebody that actually could take a decent photograph. Here's a photograph of me when I was maybe 1 or 2, something like that. And there's some compositional elements in here that you wouldn't necessarily find in a regular snapshot kind of photograph. So I'm appreciative of that. This is another one. And so he's got some diagonals running through there. That's all good. There's another one here where there's a long diagonal and a focal point. So anyway, my dad went to college with a couple of good friends of his that were very interested in photography and cameras, and they both had the Nikon F. Anybody ever picked a Nikon F up? Back there? Yeah. How long did you have to wait lift before you could actually pick one up? I mean, they're not a light camera, but they were, this is the first kind of professional camera that I had. Wearing one of these around your neck you could probably do the same thing with like a gallon of milk. Just wear that around your neck and you get a pretty good idea about how heavy these old 35mm Nikons were. But anyway, so these friends had these cameras, and so that was the first time that I really got to see this kind of camera in action. And one of them ended up shooting a roll of film, or I don't know how many rolls at that point, but my parents had recently purchased an old farm in southwestern Wisconsin, and so one of these guys went around and used that camera to take these images. And this was the first time that I'd ever really seen anybody take what I would consider to be a kind of art photograph. This is from the cell, inside the cellar, looking out of the barn. And this is some of the views going on in there. But this is also the first time that I'd ever seen somebody say, this was the guy's wife is in red. He said, I need some red down there. Why don't you run down the hill and provide me with my red standing sun? So actually thinking compositionally, thinking about color, thinking about everything else that's happening in that image, and looking for what you need and putting it there if you need it. Oh, and the sun or the light coming through the slats in the barn. Boy, I tried to replicate that for years. And then my favorite, the old Oscar Pepper bottle. So anyway, these were some early influences on the way that I would start to see things that I would start to look at. So these friends then got my dad to purchase a Nikkormat, which is it's a Nikon camera, but this is all fully manual. Now, to know what that means, all of you have all of your cameras, I'm sure down to the last one, are almost or fully automatic, which means that you can point and shoot, and it creates all of the exposure that you need just as you need it. And this was different because you had to, not only was it a heavy camera, but you had to you had to set all the exposures, so you had to decide what the speed was, you had to decide what the f-stop was, so that you could think about, how much was going to be in focus, all the rest of that. And so it was, my dad was always kind of painfully slow in lots of different ways, but he was a bird watcher, and so you'd go out with him and be standing looking at birds for far beyond the time that you had the energy to stand there. He was a slow eater, and then using this camera and trying to decide what to do was also an interesting thing to watch. But this was the camera that I really fell in love with when I was old enough to realize what this thing could do. And the thing that's very different about these cameras as compared to these cameras is that these Micromats or the Nikons or any of those old cameras are pretty hefty, and so you have to hold them and put them up to your face, and really you've already thought about what's going to happen with them. Very different than just holding this out and saying cheese. And so this was like there was labor involved in using this camera, and so I really enjoyed that kind of process. And to some degree, I kind of missed that. It's a lot lighter to have a camera like this that you can stick in your pocket and not have to lug one of these around on a trip or something like that. But this was a picture that my dad took of me when I was a teenager. And again, he's actually aware of some of the compositional elements that are going on in that photograph. And he actually had me stand there for that reason. So this was the first 35 millimeter camera that I had, which was a Canon. And it's a rangefinder camera, which is a little different than an SLR or a single lens reflex, like the Micromat. I took this on a trip to South America and learned a good lesson about what happens when you leave something on the beach as the tide comes in. And also a good lesson about making sure that your film is rewound before you open the back. And so, anyway, this was my camera that I had that learning curve on. It's a nice camera. But, yeah, I don't love it the same way I love the Nikons. And then I got my own Micromat at some point. So, but mine was silver, this one, it's all black. And camera, this camera doesn't do for me what these cameras would do. I really liked the way that they felt, the things that they did, all the bells and whistles that get you kind of drooling about the things, the tools that you use to make your art. So this was an example of some of the kind of pictures that I was taking when I was roughly 15. This is still at my dad's farm. And of course I just missed, missed that big stick that was, or the big branch that was right in the middle when I set that thing up. But otherwise I would have been a pretty decent photograph. And I was my own model most of the time if I wanted people in the picture. So I ended up really working hard at setting things like this up. Here's another one from about that same time period. I found some other pictures that I had taken when I was in high school that reminded me of this project. And I had grown up in southern Wisconsin. And the neighborhood that I lived in was very scenic. I lived on the lake called Lake Geneva, if anybody's familiar with that. And so my neighborhood was basically surrounded by very, very large houses that had nobody living in them most of the time because it was summer places, very large summer places for people from Chicago. So when I went back and took these photographs, I essentially was kind of following my dog walk from when I was a kid, just trying to kind of take some images that reminded me of being there. This is the walkway down to the parkway. We had giant piers out into the lake, and I learned how to swim off of this pier. This is because the Lake Geneva was basically sort of settled, and people started building their big places there. In the 19th century, there's still a lot of paddle wheels and things that go on, that take trips around the lake, and so that was always very interesting as well. This is another parkway, I think the next one over from the one that I live by. And there's a 27 or 9 mile walk around, or path all the way around the lake. So they keep that open for people to, if you actually wanted to walk that full distance, you can. So I saw a lot of houses from not the roadside, but the lakeside as I was making these dog walks. Things like this that were not unusual. And then there's this one. This is the parkway that I live near. And this is also my bus stop. So when I started school in kindergarten, this is where I first went to get on the bus. Now, if you went this direction, which was up, from here to the wall, which is where the driveway was for the next house, that's the house that was just down the hill from my bus stop, which is the Schwinn estate. And so there were a lot of houses. This is a small estate. A bigger one that's a little bit further across the lake is the Wrigley, one of the Wrigley mansions. I think there are 4 or 5 that are along the lake there. And so this is the kind of places that I was growing up around, and why specifically there were really not a lot of people around at any given time. So I spent a lot of time looking at not people, in places where there were no people and there were just kind of either architecture or other things that were not alive. Which still kind of played into this series here. So here, moving up in time, these are my walking buddies, and so they're always happy to go walk. One of the photographers that I always really enjoyed when I was growing up, and everybody does if you are interested in photography, is Ansel Adams. Very formal photographer, but also one of the things that I learned about Adams is that so much of his work was created in the darkroom. And so you wouldn't necessarily get an image like this without actually doing a lot of darkroom kind of stuff. And so one of the things that you can do with your camera is, you can do a lot of color adjustment. You can do kind of, you've got it like a built-in color darkroom in your phone. And so, whereas Adams is really looking quite subjectively at his landscape and then messing around with it in the darkroom. I figured that, I can amp up my color and, do these other things without, really calling too much attention to it. Even though there are some things that are I really like saturated colors, so I tend to use it quite a bit. But Adams is also a very formal photographer. So when you look at an image like this, or you look at an image like this, they're really hard to recreate when you're walking around looking at the nature around you, because they just don't jump out at you like this usually. I mean, for him, he was creating this, as I said, in the dark room. And the other photographer that I always enjoyed was Elliot Porter. He worked in color, and he's doing the same thing. He's really working very, very formally. And you scratch your head when you go out into the woods or wherever you're going nature is, trying to actually replicate a photograph like his. So, as I have done other photographic work, which is, it's a long-standing thing, trying to do some things that I am interested in, and things that I can actually say that I'm pretty proud of as far as images go. So I threw some of these in here. Again, trying to work very formally, just as I have done with these things, and trying to be as much Elliot Porter or Ansel Adams as I possibly could. And a lot of these are colored or black and white. Is the other choice. I'm always a master of the obvious. But these are fun to do, and again, it's the same kind of looking that I was doing to get at these images, just a little bit different format. There's a screech owl sitting there. So, anyway, the whole idea of really, is if you're going to use a camera anyway, to then make something more than just a snapshot kind of an image. It's easy to do that. It's like pointing a gun somewhere, and without really aiming, you just aim it, and it takes whatever is in the frame. With this, working this way, you really have to work a lot harder at trying to make sure that all of the elements and principles of design are actually at work when you are creating these images. And it's not an easy practice. It's really quite hard to look out there in the world and try and fit what's happening that you can see into something that you can then put a frame around and have everything inside that frame actually come out the way that you really want to see it as, rather than just what's out there. And this is just because I heard that it's going to snow somewhere in Minnesota this week. One of the things that, because I keep mentioning the elements and principles of design, and because you all, if you have been in any of my classes, we talk about that quite a bit. I wrote a song about things, the elements and principles of design. So I've got they're going to accompany me. And I'm going to, there'll be the words up on the screen just in case you can't actually hear us, so you can follow the bouncing. There's no bouncing. Are we good? Good. This is called the Elements and Principles of Design song.
It's harder than you thought.
indicated to you that you might grow up and be obtuse. Does anybody have any questions? Nothing. Wait, there was a hand that shut up. Yes.
How did you, I know you've taken more than this, how did you narrow down to what you hung on the wall?
A lot of it was just trying to find a balance between the different, close up, further away. Because it's also Kasota, and I wanted, to have a little bit better. It's not like a travel photograph set, but it's it's not a great indicator of what Kasota is like, but just to try and have a little variety to the imagery, because there tends to be a lot of images that are either looking down at the ground or something where you can spend a lot of time and think these are great, and then you put them out and it goes, guy never looks up. Anything else?
Can I add to that? I think it's interesting that you point that out, because that the fact that most of these, you can't tell that it's Kasota. I remember when I was in grad school, one of my profs was like, go on this mission, go take these photos, do this before you go to New York. And then I come back with these images from Minneapolis, and he's like, yeah, well, that could be anywhere. So why did you call them Kasotagraphs? Well, yeah, they could really be anywhere. I mean, you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, I mean, specifically because it was a project that I gave myself that was based in the area that I live, and also, I mean, Kasota, if anybody's ever driven through it, is not very big, and I'm focused on, maybe the upper, fifth of it, something like that. I mean, 1.2 miles around is no more than about a quarter mile in any direction, so it's not a lot of ground that I'm covering, but I still felt that I needed to talk about it in terms of that it was from Kasota, and I limited the images to the ones that were just from Kasota instead of, I mean, I take these other places too, to show you more, but decided to just keep the focus tight. Yes?
Did your neighbors ever ask you why you kept taking pictures of their garbage cans? Or did anybody ever stop you and say, well, what are you taking pictures of?
Well, how many people do you know that are out at 6:30 in the morning? So that's the issue. And the garbage can people, the garbage cans were at the end of a very long lane that there were two houses further back, so it was, a good quarter mile back to their places. So, and if anybody ever came by, it's easy to slip back in your pocket. I'm out walking my dogs. Somebody was talking about it the other day about the school bus one. It's a little creepy when you're out there scoping out the school bus. I mean, you gotta get your camera all ready and wait and know that the bus is coming. And then as soon as the bus passes, then drop everything and move over and take your picture. And hopefully nobody was looking. But that's the thing about when you're not around people really, nobody's really watching you do what you're doing. I don't remember seeing very many people out looking at me taking pictures. And if they actually said anything, then I usually would say, I'm just taking pictures for art. Yes.
Does your father was your biggest inspiration?
Say that one more time.
Does your father was your biggest inspiration?
I don't know that he necessarily was. I mean, my grandfather also took a lot of pictures. There various people in the family have taken, have been sort of the photographers as they went along. But I think just a combination of having him take images and having friends that were interested in doing the same thing was influential. because otherwise, how would you ever stumble on that and think, oh, there's an interesting thing, because most of your family just goes, here's one, look. So, yes.
When you were going out, was it more of, oh, this is interesting, how can I compose this? Or did you ever go out and before you go out say, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that in pre-planning?
No, there's no pre-planning. It's all just kind of whatever happens. I mean, it's also, the light is a lot of it. And there are times when you can hardly see what you're taking, and you just kind of are more or less guessing. And then if you can actually see it on camera, you can mess around with the adjustments and actually bring up the image more than you would have been able to any other way. So most of it is just, you see something and you go, you're walking along and then you have to stop for some reason. So.
Besides, what do you see as limitations with this? Like you took 50 photos, they're all framed, they're all beautiful. You do like a zillion of them, 1 million of them. What would be the limitation?
Your ability to stay interested. Looking at them, I mean, it's I think like when you see them on Instagram as a group, you kind of scroll through them, and they have the tendency to look, similar because of the compositional kind of strategies that you use, and so but I think the images are all strong on their own, and they are nice and supporting themselves. So I'm not sure that there are really any limitations. Yeah, how much you can afford it. Yeah. I mean, this wasn't terrifically expensive to do, but there is cost to it, and so that limits you to some degree. That is, yeah.
So, like you said, you're pretty much trying to take an ordinary kind of day and kind of put it in a sublime light, which is kind of like a pretty prominent theme through modern art. So it's a pretty accessible topic, and through the use of Instagram, it's also pretty accessible. So I guess what my question is has this exhibition, you being in the arts area here, have you been met with any adversity over this, or is it more kind of an easily accessible thing that people kind of readily accepted?
It's only been up for a few days. So no, nobody's said anything. And that's kind of the thing that I think you face when you do take photographs, is that, since everybody knows how to use a camera, you always have people comparing themselves to, oh, I could do that. And so but I think that these stand on their own in a way that's different than what most people end up seeing, or the way that they end up seeing what's within their frame.
One question.
Yeah.
So based on your hymn, the elements and principles, so are you saying that anybody that knows these can make art? Is that so objective? Doesn't there have to be something subjective about art?
You've heard, I grew up hearing, you have to learn the rules before you can break them. And once you, it's really difficult to break these rules because you end up with nothing. And so there is, to me, that there is no real objectivity to it. It's just the kind of the subjective way that you end up using those things within your framework. Because if you try and walk, well, it's what are you taking a picture of for one thing if it doesn't have some elements in it, and then the way that it is put together, and the way that we can take snapshot photographs and we can still like them because our camera tells us where to put our heads, and when two people get in the frame, then two circles go off, and it'll sort of frame it for you. But I think you have to have a little more control, or a little more subjective control over those objective, those elements, or those principles. Yeah.
Eric, this reminds me so much, this show reminds me of a thing. So I got a story and then I got a question.
And then a thing?
Yeah. Once, my friend and I decided we were going to walk from Mankato to Minneapolis. And we didn't train, we didn't do anything. We just decided that week, yeah, let's do it. And so we went to Cup the night before, got a bunch of trail mix, and then the next morning we got up and went. We didn't make it to Minneapolis. We got about as far as that Jolly Green Giant sign on 169. So we just started walking up 169 before, and that was where our feet hurt so bad we couldn't even move anymore. So we ended up just sort of crashing in the park down there. But on the way up 169, because the thing is, I've been up 169, Highway 169, so many zillions of times in my life, but walking it was a completely different story. Suddenly, I was looking at things that I had seen a million times for a really long time. And cars were on my side, buzzing by me, but I was like, oh, what's that up there? What's that? That lump, mile ahead. Oh, maybe it's a dead raccoon. Well, let's go see. A half hour later, you're at the raccoon. And so, my question is, this whole art show is kind of like a way of seeing. That walking trip taught me something, that I was seeing things that I'd seen my whole life. But now I'm seeing them for longer, where I'm making observations closer. You know that silo that says Cambria on it on the way up to 169? It used to be a Coke can. Well, here we are looking at that Coke can for 2 hours on our way to it. So what's interesting to me here is, was this an exercise in a way of seeing, where now you're on your walk, but you've got an objective to look at things in ways that maybe you haven't seen them in a new way? Was that kind of the exercise as you went out for it? Was kind of looking at new and interesting ways of seeing the world that you already see every day because you live in Kasota, but now it's like you're forcing yourself to have new eyes? Was that sort of the plan?
Yeah, right. I mean, it was a very focused, or what's the other word? Intentional. Very intentional. You've got the thing in your pocket, and your intention is to go out and see something, or maybe not. Maybe you don't see anything that day, but it's really hard not to. And so. It really opens your eyes to lots and lots of different things that are out there. I remember Lois Yeager saying something like, artists see things that we just the normal people just don't see. And that kind of always stuck with me too. It's like, okay, so if this is sort of a gift that I have, then I guess I need to get out and exercise that so that I can get better at the seeing that I have been forgetting to do and the expression of it. Is that?
I love it, yeah. I know.
I love you too, man.
I was just going to add to that. I think any photographic artist, or artist in general, if they're truly artists, they are looking at the world around them. Every semester I hear, well, I'm in Mankato, there's nothing to take pictures of. You just have to look. You just have to pay attention and see how the light is falling on things, because that's so much what a photograph is about.
There's no greater motivation for me than to listen to the Wagner students. you know, those kinds of things, especially the, you know, go out and take some pictures, you know, the things that they don't see over and over and over, you know, is just amazing to me, because there's so much that you can see.
So going with the scene thing, so when I first got here, you know, I just went from class to class, but then I had to go outside to run, and then while I was outside, I realized there's statues everywhere.
They're all new. That's why they're only been up about. Yeah. So, yeah, you just weren't seeing them before.
I think what you said tonight says that there's more to it than just walking outside and looking in a way that you don't ordinarily look. I think we live in a culture that's a great leveling, because everyone's a photographer, kind of nobody is. We all carry a camera in our pocket that has a phone attached to it. So how, you've written a song about the thing that makes the difference. Was that, you know, you listen to one of your students, maybe that's motivation. Do you have an impulse to sort of say, no, wait, it's not just about having something in your pocket you can record images with. There's more to art than that. And so I think photographers have a particularly tough road to hoe in that regard, because everybody is a photographer, if you think of it that way. How much did that play into the way you were thinking about this, or maybe the motivation of doing this on the scale that you've done it?
Well, I think it's a big motivator. I think also one of the reasons that I did this was to actually show students that you don't have to go out and spend, you know, go far distances to see interesting stuff. And so that was important. In putting this talk together too, I've been thinking about, and in showing you the cameras that I grew up with, you know, the difference between them and this particular camera is there seemed to be almost like a genie in the bottle in some way when you were holding that camera, because there was something magical that happened in there, and it's certainly the same way now, but in a different sense. You know, the weight of those things and the kind of noises that they made and everything else, but also the intentional way that you had to actually make them work was very different than this. To me, this is like holding up a sheet of glass and then something else comes from it. There's not a lot of thinking except I'm pointing and I'm, you know, pressing the button. Whereas before, it was a much more kind of engaging process. I'm certainly still thinking intentionally when I'm making these things. I hope you can see that. But you know, there's just this different way of experiencing that photographic process. The farther away you get from actual light to, you know, electronic light, that's another thing that kind of, you know, messes with my head, because, you know, this actually taken light like a lens and do the things that light would do, flipping upside down, exposing a sheet of film, and, you know, all of that kind of very direct kind of process. Well, this does something else, you know, that I don't know what that is, and so it's you know, it's like trying to fix your cars these days. You really can't without, you know, some big car shaman that will come and bless your car and make sure that it actually comes back to life in a way that you can't do anything. So, any other questions? Kurt.
Well, I just wanted to make a very quick comment about how in the film world there are, you know, there's this kind of gear lust, and I'm sure it happens in other fields as well. And then inevitably somebody comes out and is like, you know what, I'm gonna make a movie with an iPhone, and then this iPhone movie ends up, you know, at a film festival because the content was good. They had great composition, they had great stories. I just wanted to say that when I look at this, I think about that.
How long have you worked on this project?
I started doing this, like, what does it say? 2014, I believe. So, you know, it's been a couple, 3 years. And that was another part of it too, is that I initially set this up to be kind of a year-long project. You know, from the end of winter through to the end of winter a year later. And then it kind of lengthened, just because it was fun and I enjoyed it. And so, but I think, you know, giving yourself projects like that to do with limitations. I'm only going to use this camera, I'm going to use this application, I'm going to use my dogs as prods to get out the door. I need to leave about the same time every day because I still have to go to work and all the rest of that. And so, you know, you make that into kind of a small package that then you see what you can create from that instead of, you know, trying to start out with a huge package and then not know where to go with it. And so I think that's another reason why these are successful, is because they, and especially when they're limited to just a little area around my house. You know, they still work in other places, but I would never show them because they're different places. And I'm seeing those different places in different ways. Yes.
2 questions. What kind of phone did you use? And then why did you choose to frame them the way that you did with the thick wood, unfinished or unvarnished?
Okay, the phone is a Samsung S5. This is 6. Is this a 7 now? 8? 12. This is a 6. Well, what was the other one that I started out with? A 5, wasn't it? 3. Isn't that what you had? But then I had one up from that. Well, that's important, right? And, okay, so it's something Samsung. And then I originally thought about actually matting and framing these, but as Storm and I talked about this, we ended up thinking that it would be a different way to put these onto these boxes, and you can just get these from Dick Blake. And you know, they create their own world in a way. It's without framing them traditionally. You're not putting them into like regular art space. You're putting, you know, these kind of almost stand out like sculptures in a way that kind of project out into your world, even though they are beyond the window. And so I like the way that this works because you're not focusing on all of the additional stuff around it. You're just looking at the image, and all of them are the same. You know, there's not any variation in the way that they are framed or anything like that. So I think that the focus remains on the images themselves. Does that answer your question?
Does it?
Anybody else? Well, thanks for coming out tonight. I know it's